been looking forward to speaking to this guy all week. I kind of look forward to it on an ongoing basis as law stories of one sort or another materialize. I think the big story out of a legal proceeding today is unquestionably the grand jury summary in the Georgia election case. David Katz will cast it in the right light and also give us some clarity on this. He joins us on Thursdays. I inherited him after I campaigned to inherit him from Pat Thurston, who used to have him as a regular guest on KGO.
Yeah.
We miss our Pat, but we love our David Katz. He is the former assistant U.S. attorney, and he joins us now. David Katz, everybody. Hi, David.
Hi, great to be with you guys.
Give me the significance of this case. What is this case, and what is this summary report?
Well, the latest news, Mark, is a little underwhelming. People didn't think it was going to have very many details, and it didn't disappoint. About the only detail that it has is that the grand jury thought that one or more persons had committed perjury in front of the grand jury, but they don't say who. Now, of course, the significance of the case overall is that it could lead to the indictment, conviction, and incarceration of Donald J. Trump. Also, the same could happen to John Eastman, who was the advisor who said that, oh, it's fine if Pence, doesn't accept the votes, that Pence has all this power that he doesn't have, and also the slates. Remember, the issue with the slates is that while slates were elected by the people of each state and then sent off to Congress to cast the vote of the state, Eastman had this concocted this baseless, really, idea that it was fine if the state legislature or somebody else in the state who was friendly to Trump sent their own alternate slate, and then they certified documents that these alternate slates had either been properly constituted or were properly done. And so it might be false statements to sign under penalty of perjury or to certify that these were legitimate slates when they were really illegitimate. So Eastman is the author of that weird legal strategy that he claimed was proper. Ultimately, Pence's advisors all said that it was crazy. And remember, some of the other people told Eastman to leave them alone and go get himself a good criminal defense attorney because what Eastman was doing didn't make any sense. He had been a law professor down here in Orange County before all of this happened, or while this was happening. In any event, also Giuliani. They're looking at Giuliani, Mark, because Giuliani actually traveled into the state and met with people that said you could send these alternate slates. This was a huge fraud. Go find the other votes. And then on top of that, Mark Meadows went into the state of Georgia as an emissary of Trump. Also, Senator Lindsey Graham got involved and ultimately was forced to testify before this grand jury after fighting it in federal court. Senator Lindsey Graham from South Carolina was required to testify in Georgia. And all of this, of course, could lead to Trump. Now, the question is if this would happen at all, which it looks like something is definitely going to happen down there with the state level district attorney in Fulton County, Georgia. But my own thought is that she's likely to indict first some people like Giuliani, Eastman, maybe even Meadows, maybe some other people, and then see if she can flip any of them and try to get Trump in a second round. But it's certainly heading in that direction. I don't need to tell you that it would be precedent-setting indeed if a former president of the United States were charged in any state in the union. Just a bit of history. Vice President Aaron Burr was charged in New Jersey for his duel, and New York eventually, for his duel with Alexander Hamilton, the famous one in history, the famous one in the show Hamilton. It was illegal to duel. So Aaron Burr, the sitting vice president, was charged in a state court with dueling. But in those days, all he did was stay out of New Jersey and New York the rest of his term. And they didn't extradite people in those days from one state to another, not regularly anyway, and they didn't with Burr. So, people were joking at what's Trump going to do. He's going to hole up at Mar-a-Lago if he gets indicted, and DeSantis will never sign the extradition papers, and he'll never have to appear in Georgia. I guess he campaigned for president, never stopping in Georgia. That's kind of the joke, right?
I guess I have a quick question, because you say maybe try to get Trump on the second round, but I think maybe just I'll speak for myself. When you hear the audio recording of the phone call where he's like, just find 11,000 votes, like, I don't understand why he would need to be on a second round. Isn't that damning evidence and proof? I mean, what's the problem?
Well, Kim, that's a great question. And that's why some people think that of all the federal cases that Merrick Garland could bring, all the cases that the Southern District of New York could have brought, like they brought the one against Cohn for campaign violations with Stormy Daniels, with all the state cases, which would be the cases in New York for overcharging, undervaluing assets. It's incredibly expensive and worth a lot when I want the bank to loan me money, and it's worthless when I want to pay tax on it for the IRS. That kind of conduct by Trump and the Trump organization, that out of all of those cases, Kim, they think this is the best one because he's on tape. He's not acting like a mafia boss. He's not going through an intermediary. But I guess the problem is, number one, it's biting off an awful lot with a lot of loyalists of Trump. And they could give testimony at that trial, sort of fall on their sword and take the rap. So in other words, Meadows says, well, I told Trump that there really were extra votes down there, that there had been shenanigans. I'd seen it with my own eyes. I told him, please make this call. No one seems to be listening to me. We need to find these votes, meaning they're out there. They exist. They're, buried under a laptop in a counting center in Atlanta. You need to call the Secretary of State. I can't get through to him. So if you have testimony like that from people that's exculpatory of Trump, the trial could turn into a big mess. It could also get severed or something like that, and they could end up trying the lower down people first. Not that, the chief of staff to the president of the United States is lower down, or Giuliani, quote, America's mayor, is so low down. But they're lower down than Trump. And so the clean thing, of course, if you're a prosecutor like I was a federal prosecutor, you would love to have Meadows saying, I told Trump this was total garbage. There was no undercount. There was no problem. And Trump said, I don't care. I'm grabbing the phone. I'm calling Georgia. I'm calling this guy. Let's see if I can't, intimidate him. I'm the president of the United States, after all. You'd much rather have the latter, with Meadows having flipped and being on your side from a first round, than take your chances with Trump, in state court in an unprecedented situation of a local or state prosecutor, indicting and trying to put in prison the former president of the United States. And people say, well, would he really go to prison in a case like that? He might not. But I mean, a lot of these are things that, you or I would go to prison if we did them. If you or I tried to concoct 11,000 votes that didn't exist in a state so we could turn the election. I mean, they sent people to jail in this country for casting one vote, right? These people who they're felons, but they think that they've gotten an expungement, and so they think they can vote. And then they vote, and then the Republicans start screaming, oh my, it's usually the Republicans, oh my God, this felon voted, he or she knew he or she was a felon. They sometimes indict people for fraud for stuff like that. So the idea that the president would go to prison the former president would go to prison after something like this is not at all remarkable. Again, the idea being no one's above the law, and no one's above the prison sentences that other people get for like offenses.
Yeah, but sadly, we're learning that people are above the law.
I just want to find 11,780.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's a...
what do you have to do to be arrested? I mean, come on.
I think you just articulated so well how we have people accidentally voting in the wrong place or voting when they shouldn't, and they actually prosecute that. Meanwhile, this guy is he's head of the parade anyway that's associated with overturning election results in Georgia while he's busy absconding with 11,000 classified documents, et cetera. I mean, look, that's just part of it. His administration was a treasure trove of violations either of ethical standards or of legal standards. And yet it seems as though getting him is the toughest thing. It's like that whole Sherlock Holmes Moriarty thing or how the villain in all these superhero just somehow escapes and, it makes for the sequel. I want you to speak to that, but I also want you to include in your answer, if you would, please. You talked about Eastman and you talk about Meadows. You did mention Lindsey Graham and Giuliani. Do you think they would actually level charges against Lindsey Graham? Because to me, that is a shade off, or maybe half a click off of where Trump might be in terms of a political official who is high profile enough that it would be problematic to charge him.
I don't think Lindsey Graham, the senator from South Carolina, is going to be charged in this case. I don't think he has any defense that it's the speech and debate clause. I think that, he was not on the floor of the Senate. He was getting involved in, real retail politics in another state, no less. So I don't think there's any legal reason or he'd have any special defense. But, it's a lot to bite off. It really is.
Okay.
Again, I don't mean to rain on everybody's parade, but it does really present issues. I mean, some county prosecutor in Texas or, in Wyoming decides to charge Biden in a local court. This is a real problem and I think this case is so righteous. It's so strong that it should be brought. As Kim said, he's on tape. And I think it's very simple that he means to concoct those votes. I think just from the context and hearing him, I think even if a Meadows or a Giuliani said, I thought that the president, from my conversations with him, the ex-president, really had a doubt in his mind and really was doing the right thing. I don't think he sounds like someone who's doing the right thing on that call, and you have his voice. Having said that, I think that prudentially that the prosecutor there in Fulton County is going to be really careful what she bites off, and I don't think she's biting off Senator Graham. Giuliani, Giuliani's a disbarred lawyer at this point, or at least he's a suspended lawyer. I think a lot of people have a perception of him that, he kind of lost his mind under Trump, that somehow he was so mad at Hillary Clinton. He was so eager to get whatever he was trying to get, golf outings around the world or whatever, that he really did cross the line. And so I just think in the court of public opinion, there'd be a lot more support for charging Giuliani on the same amount of evidence that there would not be for charging Senator Graham. That's just my feeling about it. And I think Mark Meadows is in a very difficult situation because he turned over. At first, he was cooperating. What did they say about Kerry? He was for it before he was against it. But if you were ever going to call someone a flip-flopper, Mark Meadows is the ultimate flip-flopper because first he turns over all the records and he turns over all the phone calls. He doesn't really fight that subpoena very hard. The reason that we know about him emailing with Justice Thomas's wife and the crazy things that Thomas's wife said and forwarded on is because Mark Meadows turned over all of those documents, Mark. But then when it came to actually testifying, he started to assert executive privilege. He may yet try to assert some kind of Fifth Amendment privilege of his own that it would incriminate himself. So I think Meadows is in terrible shape because he either takes the fifth, which is a terrible look, or he testifies, but he's got all of these records that lock him in to what actually happened. So if he tells a different story, for all we know, he's the person who the grand jury down there in Atlanta, Georgia, thinks was the one who was lying. But it could be lots of other ones. They had, I think they had over a dozen witnesses down there. And now, of course, the ball is in this Fannie Willis's court. She's the DA down there. She's got her report from the grand jury. She's got the unredacted one where they're recommending who ought to be indicted. And so I think there's really pressure on her to go with the first round of indictees. And I don't think, as much as Trump deserves it, that he's going to be in that first round of indicted people. That's what I think.
Well, you've actually made a very good case and explanation for why it won't happen. One of the better ones I've heard.
Mark.
Yeah. I mean, it just, you see this presidency.
I'm such a downer guest. I used to do this to Pat Thurston, too.
We're I think it's a result of being in the society we're in, litigious society maybe, and everybody feels as though they've got a lawsuit, right? And it's that, like, when you feel I'm going to sue this guy, I'm going to call a lawyer, and you call, and then the lawyer says, actually, you really do not have a case here, and it's that feeling. I lived that feeling for 4 years under Trump, and now I'm living it in the aura that he's left behind, the legal aura. The reality is, though, that his administration was marked by a lot of things that ran roughshod over ethics, as I was saying, but were not technically illegal. I mean, I'm thinking of, the emoluments clause. I mean, even that has a wide interpretive aspect to it. It was, to me,
That word was about to roll. That word was about to roll off my lips, and the court delayed that so much. And he didn't have either house of Congress the first 2 years. But what he did just with that hotel, the old post office,
thank you, yes,
was such a charade. I mean, the Saudis came, they paid $10,000 to rent a room for a night. They'd rent it for $500. They all went drinking there. They paid these crazy tabs. The Secret Service, right? They normally pay $1,000 a night and they need 3 rooms. But with Trump, when he's president, they need 10 rooms and they pay 3 times as much. And it's always at a Trump property. I thought that case was dead to rights, but one thing was to find someone withstanding. The other hotels tried to move on that, but of course they couldn't bring a criminal case. They were the victims, that people were not staying at beautiful places like the Marriott or the Ritz. They were staying at the tacky Trump hotel, which, by the way, doesn't seem to be making it. As soon as it wasn't a way to buy favors from Trump and his team, seems like nobody really wanted to stay there very much. They went back to the Marriott and the Ritz, right?
Now, you said it so well. I mean, that's exactly right. It was a pay-to-play setup, and there were, even in the case of the Saudis, and I also want to say that UAE maybe as well, there were entire floors of that hotel rented, and other Trump properties as well around the world, that were never occupied. It was essentially just a way to get more money into the Trump organization. And it wasn't just foreign powers. It was also the corporations that wanted okays in, I think, T-Mobile. It was the one I recall specifically. They wanted an okay on a merger, so they bought out a bunch of the hotel the night before their meetings, before the executives associated in the White House Oval. So, that seemed to me to be such a layup. And then, again, the legal realities, it just slipped away. So, as we talk about these other cases slipping away.
Can I mention one other thing too?
Yeah.
Can I mention one other thing too? The august House of Representatives is now getting into Hunter Biden. Of course, those of us who are not like card-carrying, Trump lovers or Jim Jordan lovers sort of watch in amazement, because one of the reasons we're watching in amazement is that they're not interested in Kushner. Now, Kushner had this building in New York City that he'd overpaid for along with his family. They couldn't get rid of it. It was a famous building called 666 Fifth Avenue, known as the Top of the Sixes. They couldn't get rid of the Top of the Sixes. They paid more than twice as much for it as they should have. They got bailed out by some Canadian fund that it turns out was controlled by Qatar, the Qatar country. Qatar, right? They get bailed out for $500 million. And then, of course, Kushner goes and gets himself in the middle of a controversy that looks very much like he was on the side of. No one in your audience can guess what Middle Eastern country he went in on the side of. Qatar.
Yeah.
Qatar, my friend. And now, he leaves office and he gets this $2 billion fund, funded by some other Middle Easterners. The Congress of the United States and Jim Jordan and this guy Comer, they have no interest in it all, right? But of course, whether there was a wink and a nod from Biden to his out-of-office father, Joe Biden, now the president, this is going to consume, their attention for the next, 2 years. But no interest in Kushner. The Democrats are trying to put the focus on Kushner, and Kushner, from what we've seen so far, is resisting it entirely.
Well, if you really want something, I mean, that's exactly right, of course. David is just so right on. But Kushner's brother, Jared Kushner's brother, look at his business. Look how his business exploded. Look at all the gifts that the last administration gave him, and look at his business now. He's the one who was able to really exploit access to his brother, who was the shadow president, in effect. You can read the book Kushner, Inc. from Judy, I forget her last name now. She's been on the show, and I'm embarrassed I don't remember her last name. But she does a great job on that and a great takedown. And yeah, I mean, it was, and as you've articulated so clearly, Jared Kushner runs this fund, and it's funded by the Saudis. Where was the Trump? This is like playing Trump greatest hits with you. I love this, David. Where was the Trump first overseas meeting of his administration held? Saudi Arabia. I mean, it's just, it was so
There's
clear.
never been anything like this.
Yeah, it was just so clear, David. I
Was that
really.
the one where they had the weird globe? They were all
Yes,
sitting around
where they
and
had the
touching
weird- yes.
globe. That was like a James Bond movie. That was
It
like
was.
the villains in a James Bond movie. Trump, the Saudi, the other guy holding the globe, looking at the globe.
It
world
was the
domination
wildest
by the
photo
oil
op.
industry.
That's not Saudi Arabia pays cash.
Yeah. Oh gosh.
Can I
yeah.
mention one other thing? Can I mention one other thing? We used to do this with Pat Thurston. We do the lightning round.
All right, go ahead for it.
But a man who is free in America and who will not be indicted is Matt, the Gates of Hell, Gates. I did predict at that time another downer appearance by me that Gates would not be indicted, that the 17-year-old girl was not going to lead to an indictment, that he was not, at least as most people understand it, the sort of pimp who gets indicted under the Mann Act. He might have been his own kind of pimp the way the kids use it, and obviously he shouldn't have been running around with a 17-year-old girl, and he shouldn't have been paying for all that stuff and lavishing gifts on her and having her meet him for assignations. But having said all of that, I didn't think it was really a proper Mann Act prosecution, and that's what Merrick Garland has recently decided. So Gates is
Gates
not going
walks
to be
away.
charged.
I do hug and kiss people casually.
It is the case that he just runs roughshod. Gates is amazing. I mean, he really is, and he's a smart guy too. But he's got a little bit of a proclivity that might get him into trouble. David Katz.
Can I tell you the best line? The best line from the whole case is he was the wingman for some guy who was the treasurer down there. The treasurer committed all kinds of crimes and got 11 years in prison. He seemed to be a total menace in Florida. This guy who got the 11 years in federal prison. He wanted to roll over and flip on Gates and get a big sentence reduction. That didn't work out for him. And his lawyer, the lawyer for the 11 years in prison guy, was very upset. And he said, "Why prosecute the privileged when defendants of limited culpability provide sufficient cannon fodder?" Whatever you can say about the guy who wanted to flip on Gates, he was no angel, nor was he a person of limited culpability, as the judge found when he gave that guy 11 years in prison.
He was hip deep in it, that guy that you were talking about who got prison. It was crazy. I mean, really, he was a serious, I think, borderline sex offender, you know? So it was...
He's fantastic.
He also stole your driver's license and tried to exploit the information.
That's right.
He was
That's
the head
right.
of like this whole Florida DMV.
Oh, that's just crazy. Crazy. David, we love talking to you. Much to cover already as we expand this conversation for next week. Thank you for being here. Appreciate it so much.
Think of the circle of friends of Matt Gates. Scary, huh?
No, thank you.
There's never been anything like this.
Oh, I love it. David Katz, everybody. Bye, David. Thank you. Oh.